The air hums thick with sweat and secrets. A sultry haze that clings to every corner of the room like a second skin, wrapping the four bodies within in a cocoon of heat and shadow. Marcus's hands grip Lena's hips with a force that's both tender and possessive, his fingers pressing into her flesh with a reverence that borders on worship, yet laced with a hunger that betrays the chaos beneath his calm exterior. Her skin glistens under the dim amber glow of their bedroom lamp, a sheen of perspiration catching the light like liquid gold spilled across a canvas, her body taut and trembling beneath his touch, every muscle coiled with anticipation. She arches against him, her breath escaping in a shriek hiss that cuts through the stillness, her nails digging into the broad expanse of his shoulders, leaving crescent moons of red against his dark skin as their bodies collide in a rhythm that's primal, urgent, a cadence that drowns out the world beyond their cracked plaster wall, where the echoes of hatred linger like ghosts, restless and vengeful. Across the room, their neighbors Claire and Daniel Hargrove watch with ravenous eyes, their pale skin flushed a feverish pink, a stark contrast to the dimness, their clothes discarded in a careless heap on the warped hardwood floor, buttons glinting faintly in the shadows like scattered stars. Claire's voice slices through the humid haze, low and commanding, a velvet blade honed with desire as she leans closer to Lena, her lips brushing the black woman's ear with a shiver-inducing intimacy that sends a ripple through the air. "Put my husband's dick in your mouth," she says, her tone dripping with authority and something darker, a challenge, a plea, a thread of desperation woven into her words, and Lena hesitates only a heartbeat, her breath catching in her throat, a fleeting pause before complying. Her lips part, soft and deliberate, as Marcus watches, his chest heaving with each labored breath, his own desire warring with a shadow that flickers in his eyes. Something unspoken, something he can't yet name, a flicker of doubt, or rage, or shame, that dances just beyond his grasp. Daniel groans, a low, guttural sound that reverberates through the room, primal and unfiltered, his head tipping back in surrender, his hands threading through Lena's dark curls with a reverence that belies the chaos of the moment, fingers trembling as they trace the contours of her scalp. Claire slides behind Marcus, her fingers tracing the taut, sweat-slick lines of his back, her touch light yet insistent, her breath hot and uneven against his neck, igniting a shiver that races down his spine and coils in his gut. The room pulses with a forbidden heat, a tangle of limbs and whispered promises, gasps, moans, the rustle of skin on skin, a symphony of surrender that binds the four of them together, lost in a dance that defies the hatred that's defined their lives for the past year. Outside, the Los Angeles night presses against the windows, thick with the hum of crickets and the distant wail of sirens weaving through the smog. Oblivious to the storm brewing within, oblivious to the ruin that waits just beyond this moment of reckless, intoxicating surrender. A precipice. They teeter on, blind to the fall. The clock ticks past midnight, its hands creeping forward with a relentless tick-tock that echoes in the stillness between breaths, a metronome to their unraveling. The air grows heavier, saturated with the musk of sex, a primal scent that mingles with the faint, acrid tang of tomato juice still staining the curtains from last week's assault. A bitter reminder of the world they've briefly escaped, a world that waits to reclaim them with claws bared. Marcus pulls Claire closer, his hands rough against her smooth skin, calluses scraping against her softness, his lips finding hers in a kiss that's more battle than affection. All teeth and urgency, a clash of wills that leaves them both gasping, their breaths mingling in a hot, frantic exchange. Lena's eyes lock with Daniel's across the dim expanse, a silent question passing between them like a current, electric and unspoken. How did we get here? The answer lies buried deep, tangled in the months of torment, the slashed tires that left their Chevy crippled, the theater glass that littered their floors like broken promises, the racial slurs scrawled across their mailbox in jagged, hateful strokes, red paint bleeding into the wood like wounds that won't heal. But tonight, those memories dissolve into the slick heat of skin on skin, the boundaries of hate and love blurring until they're indistinguishable, a fever dream of passion and peril that consumes them whole. The story doesn't begin here, though. Not in this fevered collision of bodies and buried truths, where the air tastes of salt and sin. thick with the musk of exertion and the faint, sour reek of desperation that lingers like a ghost in the room. It starts a year earlier, in the sweltering summer of 1983, when Marcus and Lena Jackson first roll their beat-up Chevy into the driveway of a modest bungalow on Elmwood Drive, a quiet, white picket fence corner of Los Angeles, where the sun beats down mercilessly, baking the asphalt until it shimmers like a mirage, radiating heat that warps the air and stings the lungs. The lawns gleam with a suburban pride that feels more like a taunt than a welcome. Each blade of grass, a silent testament to a world that doesn't want them, a world that watches their arrival with narrowed eyes and clenched fists. The neighborhood greets them with tight, performative smiles that never reach the eyes, lips curling just enough to feign civility, a mask that slips the moment backs are turned, coupled with colder stares that linger too long, heavy with unspoken judgment, peeling back the thin veneer of politeness to reveal the rot beneath. A festering disdain that hums beneath the surface, like a low, menacing drone, a sound felt more than heard. Marcus, a broad-shouldered man of 32 with a voice like gravel scraped over stone, rough yet resonant, deep enough to rattle the bones of those who listen. And a laugh that could fill a room with its warmth if given the chance. Takes a job as a mechanic at a downtown garage, his hands perpetually stained with grease, the black oil seeping into the lines of his palms like a map of his labor, his spirit steeled by years of quiet defiance against a world that rarely bends for him, a world that demands he bow and smirks when he doesn't. Lena, 29, moves with a dancer's grace, her lithe frame cutting through the world with purpose, her skin a rich mahogany that catches the light and holds it. A living defiance against the pallor around her, her eyes sharp and piercing, windows to a soul that sees through people like they're made of glass, fragile and transparent, cracking under the weight of her gaze, works as a seamstress from home, her sewing machine humming late into the night, a steady drone that fills the silence between them with a rhythm as constant as their heartbeat, a lifeline in the quiet moments when words fail. They're a couple forged in resilience, their love a quiet fire that's weathered worse than this. Small-town slights whispered behind cupped hands in dusty diners, insults spat in passing on cracked sidewalks, the weight of being the only black faces in rooms full of white ones. Their presence, a challenge to the unspoken rules, a spark that ignites suspicion and scorn until Elmwood Drive decides to test them, to see how much they can bend before they break, how long their flame can flicker in the face of a storm that gathers strength with every passing day. The first tomato splatters against their front door on a Tuesday in July, the red pulp bursting on impact with a wet, sickening thud that echoes like a gunshot in the stillness, dripping down the weather wood like blood from a fresh, gaping wound, its juice pooling on the porch in a stick-accusing mess that glints in the fading light, a grotesque stain that marks their home as a target. Marcus steps outside, his jaw tight as a coiled spring, his fists clenched until his knuckles pale under the strain. The tension radiating from him in waves as his breath comes shallow and sharp, his eyes scanning the street for the culprits, finding only emptiness. The cul-de-sac silent save for the hum of cicadas, their song a mocking chorus, the culprits vanished into the dusk, leaving behind the faint, cloying scent of rotting fruit that clings to the air like a curse, a taunt that burrows into his skin. Lena watches from the window, her silhouette framed by the gauzy curtains, a dark outline against the pale fabric, her lips pressed into a thin, resolute line, her fingers twisting the hem of her apron until the fabric frays at the edges, threads unraveling like her composure. Each twist a silent prayer that this will pass. They'll get tired of it, she says. Her voice steady but hollow, a fragile thread stretched taut over the abyss of doubt. A lie they both cling to because the alternative is too heavy to bear. And Marcus nods, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun bleeds orange into the smog-choked sky, painting the world in hues of fire and ash, though neither of them believes it, not in their hearts, where the truth festers like a wound that won't heal. A quiet dread that this is only the beginning. A prelude to something uglier. By August, the tomatoes multiply, 3. Then 5, then a dozen, hurled by unseen hands under cover of night, staining the porch with crimson streaks that dry into ugly scars, splattering the walls and windows until the bungalow looks like a canvas of quiet war, a testament to malice painted in fruit and fury. The red smears a grotesque parody of welcome signs. The tires of their Chevy are slashed next, the rubber shredded into jagged ribbons that flap uselessly in the breeze. The sound a faint, mocking whisper as Marcus kneels beside the car, his hands trembling with suppressed rage. The blades work a personal insult carved into their lifeline. He spends a week's pay replacing them, his knuckles bruised from the wrench, the metal cold against his skin, each turn a battle against the helplessness that gnaws at him, his pride bruised deeper still, a dull ache that settles in his chest and spreads like ink through water, staining every breath with bitterness, every glance at the car, a reminder of their vulnerability. The neighbors don't hide their disdain, their hostility a living thing that prowls Elmwood Drive like a predator. Its teeth bared in every sidelong glance, every muttered word. The Hargroves, Claire and Daniel, live across the street, their two-story colonial a shrine to suburban perfection. Its lawn manicured to a pristine green that mocks the Jacksons' patchy yard. Its windows gleaming with a smug, untouchable sheen that reflects the street like a mirror of judgment. Claire, a sharp-featured blonde in her late 30s, her hair pulled back in a severe bun that accentuates the angular planes of her face, watches Lena with a sneer. Every time she steps outside, her ice-blue eyes narrowing to slits as she leans toward Daniel, her voice carrying across the yard in a stage whisper. They don't belong here, the words dripping with venom, masked as concern, a poison she savors as it leaves her lips. Daniel, a wiry man with a salesman's smile, too wide, too practiced, a grin that never reaches his hazel eyes, and a temper that flares like a match struck against dry tinder. Takes it further, shouting slurs when Marcus mows the lawn, his words slicing through the humid air, sharp and deliberate, each one a cut meant to draw blood, the dagger aimed at the heart of Marcus's dignity. The rest of Elmwood follows suit, a chorus of cruelty orchestrated in the shadows, a symphony of malice played out in petty acts and bold assaults. The Millers next door, the dour couple with pinched faces and perpetually downturned mouths, smash their car windows with a brick one. October night, the glass shattering with a sound like breaking bones, scattering across the driveway in glittering shards that catch the moonlight like tears. The Thompsons down the block early. Man with meaty fists and his pinched-lipped wife with a voice like a crow's caw. Leave burning paper bags of dog shit on their doorstep. The stench seeping into the house like a violation, a foulness that lingers in the curtains and the floorboards. The Wilson, an older pair with leathery skin and mean eyes that glint with spite. Spit on Lena's dresses, hanging on the clothesline, their saliva staining the fabric she'd spent hours stitching, turning her labor into a canvas of their contempt. The Jacksons endure it all, their love a shield against the onslaught, a fragile armor forged in stolen glances across the kitchen table. Late-night embraces when the world sleeps, whispered promises that they'll outlast this. But the cracks begin to show. Marcus's silences grow longer, his voice retreating into a brooding quiet that fills the house like a fog. Lena's smiles rarer, her laughter replaced by a distant, haunted look that settles in her eyes like dusk. At work, Marcus faces another battlefield, a smaller but no less brutal arena, where the air smells of oil and metal and the weight of prejudice hangs like a shroud. His boss, Evelyn Carter, a white woman in her 40s, with a smoker's rasp that grates like sandpaper against raw wood and a gaze that lingers too long, rules the garage like a queen on a greasy throne. Her authority absolute, her whims capricious, her presence a constant test of Marcus's restraint. She calls him boy, in front of the crew, her tone dripping with mockery, a word she wields like a whip, cracking it with a smirk, as the other mechanics snicker or look away, and docks his pay for imagined slights. 10 minutes late due to a bus that broke down in the heat, a smudge on a fender he didn't touch. A laugh she deems too loud, too defiant for her liking. A sound that challenges her dominion. Yet there's something else in her eyes when she looks at him. A heat that betrays her words, a flicker of want that dances behind her scorn. A contradiction that twists her features into something almost human. She brushes against him in the cramped office, her fingers grazing his arm with a touch too deliberate to be accidental, her breath catching when he meets her stare with his own, steady, unflinching, a silent rebuke that dares her to cross the line she teeters on. Marcus feels it, the pull of her desire, the contradiction of her hate, and it sickens him. A sour twist in his gut he can't shake. Revulsion that coils tighter with every encounter, though he never speaks of it to Lena, burying it deep alongside the rage that simmers every time he clocks in. A fire banked but never extinguished, smoldering beneath the surface, waiting for a spark. The neighborhood's abuse escalates through the fall and into winter, a relentless tide that erodes their defenses, washing away the fragile peace they've clung to. The Jacksons' mailbox is defaced with spray paint. "Niggers go home" scrawled in jagged red letters that bleed into the metal, a garish wound against the faded blue paint. The words, a beacon of hate visible from every window on Elmwood Drive. Their windows are shattered again, the glass crunching underfoot as they sweep it away, the broom's bristles rasping against the floor like a whispered curse, a sound that echoes in the silence of their exhaustion. The tomatoes keep coming, a ritual of malice that marks the seasons, their juice freezing into icy smears by December, the cold turning their porch into a battlefield of frost and decay. One night, a rock sails through their living room window, narrowly missing Lena's head as she stitches a client's hem under the weak glow of a lamp, the stone thudding against the wall with a dull final sound that reverberates like a death knell. Marcus storms outside, his voice a roar that splits the night. "Come out, you cowards!" The words tearing from his throat raw and ragged, but the street stays silent, the houses dark, their windows like unblinking eyes staring back, the neighbors hiding behind their curtains, cowards cloaked in shadow, their silence a weapon sharper than any stone. Lena pulls him back inside, her hands trembling, her eyes wet with unshed tears, her voice a broken whisper. "We can't keep doing this," a plea wrapped in despair, and Marcus holds her, his heart pounding against his ribs, his arms tightening around her as if he could shield her from the world, knowing she's right, but not knowing how to stop it. His embrace a cage around her fragile hope, a promise he's not sure he can keep. The months drag on, each day a new wound, each night a test of their endurance. The air grows colder, the days shorter, but the hostility only intensifies, as if the neighborhood feeds on their resilience, growing bolder with every unyielding step the Jacksons take. The tomatoes become a daily assault, the porch a patchwork of red and brown stains, the smell of rot a constant companion that seeps into their dreams. The Chevy's windows are smashed again, the brick left behind this time, a taunt in plain sight, its rough edges mocking Marcus as he sweeps the glass into a pile, his hands bleeding from shards he doesn't feel. Lena's dresses are ruined weekly now, the clothesline a target for spit and paint, her careful stitches undone by hands that despise her craft, her pride unraveling with every stained bolt of fabric. The slurs evolve into chants, shouted from lawns and porches, a cacophony that follows them like a shadow. Marcus hears it when he leaves for work, Lena when she steps out to retrieve the mail, the words a litany of hate that burrows into their bones. They stop speaking of it aloud, the weight too heavy for words, but it lingers in the silences, in the way Marcus clenches his jaw at dinner, in the way Lena's hands shake as she threads her needle, in the way they hold each other tighter at night, as if their bodies could mend what their spirits cannot. The turning point comes in March 1984, on a Saturday night thick with the scent of jasmine and ghost. The air heavy with the promise of spring and the weight of secrets that have festered too long. Lena attends a neighborhood potluck, not by choice, but because Mrs. Miller insists, her invitation laced with a challenge, the dare disguised as hospitality, her pinched smile a trap. Lena can't refuse without consequence. Marcus stays home, nursing a beer and a headache, the bottle sweating in his hand, leaving wet rings on the coffee table as the TV flickers with static and sitcom laughter he doesn't hear. His mind elsewhere, lost in the maze of their suffering. Lena slips into a green dress that hugs her curves, the fabric shimmering faintly in the lamplight. A quiet act of defiance as she steps into the Hargroves' backyard, where the gathering buzzes with forced cheer, the air heavy with cigarette smoke that curls like specters, the clink of glasses, a brittle counterpoint to the low murmur of voices that hush when she passes. Eyes following her like hawks tracking prey. She keeps to the edges, her plate untouched, the food a prop she doesn't need, her ears sharp as a blade, catching fragments of conversation that drift through the haze, snippets of gossip, petty complaints, the usual venom dressed up as small talk. She overhears Claire and Daniel by the patio, their voices low but careless, loosened by gin and the late hour, their inhibitions unraveling with every sip. Claire's laugh is a jagged thing, sharp and brittle, cutting through the noise as she says, "God, I'd kill to have her in our bed. Those legs that fire," her words slurring with want, her tongue heavy with liquor and longing. Daniel chuckles, his hand resting on her waist, his fingers tightening as he adds, "And him, Marcus? I'd watch him take you apart. We've wanted them since they moved in," his voice a conspiratorial whisper, a confession that spills out unguarded, a truth laid bare in the haze of the night. Lena freezes, her pulse racing, her mind spinning like a top, the implications crashing over her in waves, shock, disgust, a flicker of something dangerously close to curiosity. She slips away unnoticed, her heels clicking against the pavement as she hurries home, the night pressing close around her, thick and suffocating, her breath fogging in the cool air. She bursts through the door, her breath ragged, her chest heaving, the green dress clinging to her skin as she stumbles into the living room. Finding Marcus on the couch, the TV's blue glow painting his face in shifting shadows, his eyes distant until they snap to her, sharp with concern. "They want us," she says, her voice a mix of shock and something else, curiosity. Maybe, or defiance. A spark igniting in the ashes of her weariness, a fire that flares in her gaze. Marcus sets his beer down, the glass clinking against the coffee table, a sharp sound that punctuates the silence, his brow furrowing as he turns to her, his body tensing. "Who?" "Claire and Daniel," she says, and the words hang between them, electric and dangerous, a live wire sparking in the dim room, charged with a current neither can ignore. He stares at her, processing, his mind churning through the months of torment, the tomatoes, the tires, the slurs, the endless war, and then a slow, incredulous laugh escapes him, rough and disbelieving, a sound that rumbles from his chest like thunder. "After all they've done," Lena nods, her eyes blazing with a fire he hasn't seen in months, a fierce, reckless light that burns away the exhaustion, a defiance that matches his own. "They've been hating us because they can't have us," she says. Her voice steady now, a blade honed by revelation, and the realization shifts something in them both. A spark of power, a chance to turn the tables, to wield their tormentor's desire like a weapon, to reclaim agency from the ashes of their suffering. Marcus stands, pulling her close, his lips brushing her forehead, his breath warm against her skin, a grounding touch amidst the storm. "Invite them over," he says, his voice low, resolute, a decision made in the space of a heartbeat. And Lena smiles, a wicked edge to it, a curve that promises retribution and release. A pact sealed in the heat of their shared resolve. An hour later, the Hargroves knock, their faces flushed with anticipation and gin, their eyes bright with a hunger they no longer bother to hide, their steps unsteady as they cross the threshold, the scent of liquor trailing them like a shadow. The Jacksons don't waste time on pleasantries, the air crackling with intent, thick with the weight of what's to come. Lena locks the door with a deliberate click, her dress already slipping to the floor, pooling around her feet like spilled ink. The green fabric, a stark contrast against the worn hardwood. And Marcus sheds his shirt, the fabric falling away to reveal the hard lines of his body, muscles taut from labor and rage, his eyes locked on Claire's with a challenge that dares her to flinch. A gaze that strips away pretense. The room ignites with a raw, unspoken agreement. No words, just movement, just need. A collision of bodies, driven by months of tension. A release of everything they've held back. Claire's command slices through the silence. "Put my husband's dick in your mouth," and Lena obeys, her lips closing around Daniel with a deliberate grace, her eyes flickering to Marcus. A silent acknowledgement as he pulls Claire to him. Their kiss a clash of teeth and tongues, a war of want and wrath that ignites the air. The night unravels in a blur of hands and moans, the four of them tangled in a bed that creaks under their weight, the mattress sagging as the hatred of the past year melts into a desperate, primal heat, a fire that consumes them all. Daniel's hands roam Lena's body, tracing her curves with a reverence that borders on worship, his fingers trembling with the weight of his desire, while Claire's nails rake Marcus's back, leaving red trails that sting and fade, a map of their collision etched into his skin. For hours, the world outside ceases to exist, the room a cocoon of sweat and surrender, a sanctuary carved from the wreckage, a fleeting escape from the storm that waits to reclaim them. But secrets don't stay buried in Elmwood Drive, where the walls are thin and the eyes are many, where every whisper travels like a spark on dry grass. By morning, the neighborhood stirs with rumors. Miss saw the Hargroves leave at dawn, disheveled and smug, their clothes rumpled, their steps unsteady as they slipped across the street, a tableau of guilt in the gray light. Mr. Thompson heard the moans through the thin walls, the sounds carrying on the still night air, a betrayal he couldn't unhear, a violation that fueled his righteous fury. The whispers spread like wildfire, fanned by outrage and indignation, the neighborhood erupting in a storm of condemnation, their racism now laced with a bitter sting of betrayal, their moral superiority a mask for their own hypocrisy. A fragile shield against the mirror held up to their desires. The Jacksons and Hargroves become pariahs overnight, their homes targeted with renewed fury, bricks through windows, the crash of glass, a nightly hymn that shatters the silence, tires slashed again until the Chevy sits on blocks, a crippled relic of their defiance, threats scrawled in blood-red paint that drips like tears across the bungalow's walls, words like whore and traitors staining the wood. The Hargroves flee first, their colonial sold at a loss to a faceless buyer, the for sale sign a white flag of surrender, their marriage fraying under the strain, threads snapping one by one as Claire's accusations and Daniel's silences widen the gulf between them. Marcus and Lena hold out longer, their love a fragile thread stretched to breaking, a lifeline they cling to amidst the chaos. But the pressure crushes them too, relentless and unyielding. The landlord, a wiry man with a pinched face and a ledger full of excuses, evicts them with a notice citing community complaints, his voice dripping with false regret as he hands them the paper, his eyes avoiding theirs. Shunned by a neighborhood that turns its back, their allies gone, their resilience spent, they end up on the streets. Their belongings stuffed into trash bags that tear under the weight, their passion a memory that haunts them like a ghost. A bittersweet echo of a night that promised power and delivered ruin. Marcus regrets the night that cost them everything, the weight of it bowing his shoulders as he trudges through Los Angeles, his boots scuffing the pavement, the city's neon lights casting long shadows that swallow him whole. Lina mourns the defiance that led to ruin, her eyes searching the horizon for a redemption that never comes, her hands clutching a trash bag that holds the remnants of their life, a dress, a wrench, a photo of better days, her steps faltering beside his homeless. They wander the sprawling expanse of the city, two souls caught in the wreckage of desire, and a system that never forgave them for daring to cross its lines, their footsteps echoing on the pavement, a quiet requiem for what was lost, the dirge for a love that burned too bright and a defiance that cost too much. The streets swallow them, indifferent and vast, their story fading into the hum of traffic and the cries of vendors, a cautionary tale whispered in the wind, about passion that defies, about hate that destroys, about a neighborhood that punishes, and about two people who dared to play a game of heat and ruin and lost everything in the fire.